Welcome back. You are still watching the Arise News special coverage of the U.S. elections. But before we engage our next guest, let's take a look at the statements by Vice President Joe Biden and President Donald Trump on the U.S. presidential elections 2020. We'll be right back.
Good evening. Your patience is commendable. We knew this was going to go long, but who knew we were going to go into maybe tomorrow morning, maybe even longer. But look, we feel good about where we are. We really do. I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. We knew because of the unprecedented early vote and the mail-in vote that it was going to take a while. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted, every ballot is counted. But we're feeling good. We're feeling good about where we are. We believe one of the nets has suggested we've already won Arizona, but we're confident about Arizona. That's a turnaround. We also just called it for Minnesota, and we're still in the game in Georgia, although that's not one we expected. And we're feeling real good about Wisconsin and Michigan. And by the way, it's going to take time to count the votes. We're going to win Pennsylvania.
Because you know what happened? They knew they couldn't win, so they said, let's go to court. And did I predict this, Newt? Did I say this? I've been saying this from the day I heard they were going to send out tens of millions of ballots. I said exactly, because either they were going to win, or if they didn't win, they'll take us to court. So Florida was a tremendous victory, 377,000. Texas, as we said. Ohio, think of this. Ohio, a tremendous state, a big state. I love Ohio. We won by 8.1%, 461,000. Think of it. Almost 500,000 votes. North Carolina, big victory with North Carolina. And so we won there. We lead by 76,000 votes with almost nothing left. And all of a sudden, everything just stopped. This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. So our goal now is to ensure the integrity for the good of this nation. This is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay? It's a very sad moment. To me, this is a very sad moment, and we will win this, and as far as I'm concerned, we already have won it. So I just want to thank you, and I want to thank all of our support. I want to thank all of the people that worked with us.
Well, that's vote counting there after the statements by Vice President Biden and President Trump. And this vote counting has resumed in Philadelphia. That's it there on the screen. Beyond the fact that the 2020 United States presidential election has seen the highest number of votes cast since 1900, a lot of facts and figures continue to emerge as Americans wait with bated breath for how it will all pan out in the short, medium, and long terms. Now, we'll move on very quickly to our next guest, and Tundu Abiola is joining us again in this segment. And we're now being joined by also a Nigerian American and professor of political science at Johns Hopkins University, Chika Mordi. Over to you, Rufai.
Right, it's a pleasure having you, Chika Mordi. Chika Mordi, just help us make sense of what is happening. Nobody saw it this way. I mean, the polls and the pollster were awash with 5%, 12% lead in some cases for Biden. But nobody saw it was going to go up to this level, crunch time, that the president would even come out without results fully declared, to declare victory. And a lot of people are still looking at states like Pennsylvania and the likes. I mean, make sense of all of this that is currently happening, because a lot of people can't make sense of the confusion now.
Well, thank you for having me on. Just in reference to the last speech we had, I think it's a very unfortunate characterization that the election is a fraud. But having said that, if you listen to the president's words carefully, he talked about stopping voting, not stopping counting. So to that extent, the process continues. And I expect that America's democracy, which is the world's oldest, is resilient enough to let the process end. Now, why is it tied? How did we get here? I believe your last speaker talked a lot about the Electoral College. So the way elections work in the US is quite different from how it works in Nigeria. So rather than people directly electing the president, which is a popular vote, you have this thing called the Electoral College, where the states, based on popular votes, send electors to the Electoral College. 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, have a slight difference. They allocate by congressional districts and by the statewide winner. So what that does do is it creates a parallel track to the actual popular vote. Now, typically, who wins the popular vote wins the Electoral College. But in the last in the last 2 decades, we've had 2 instances where the winner of the Electoral College was not the winner of the popular vote. And it looks poised to look that way for a while. If you're a Republican running, you're more likely, if you win, you're less likely to win the popular vote if you win the Electoral College. So where we are now is that the polls, yes, they were slightly off. And when I say slightly off, what I mean by that is if you look at the margins of error, plus minus for the polls, a lot of the results are consistent with that. The polls might have said giving Florida and some places to Biden if you aggregate them, but if you look at the total margin of error, it still fell somewhat within that.
Well, Chika Mordi, you teach political communication, strategy, and public policy. If you were to compare the 2 candidates, whatever happens at the end of the day, what will be your assessment of the 2 major candidates with regard to communication, strategy, and their public policy focus?
In terms of strategy, Team Trump, President Trump has had a very, very strong candidacy. They've been very strategic in how they approach this. Their strategy was basically to max out on the base in terms of turnout and to depress, not suppress, the minority votes, which typically favor Democrats. And the early results, the early analysis of the results have come out has been that they've been successful. The African American and Latino votes that went to President Biden are lower than they were for candidate Secretary Clinton in 2016. And President Trump has been able to increase turnout among his base. So that strategy appears to have worked for him. It's one that is divisive, it's one that's not quite been unifying, but it's been ruthlessly effective. Now, for Team Biden, on the other hand, going in, they also knew that they had to increase turnout and widen the margins among minority voters, mainly African American and Latinx. They were not quite successful in doing that. Now they got a large amount of defection from some urban moms and some other groups that for people above 65 who were more reliable Republican. They narrowed the margins in those places. So we would see how it plays out. But the lesson from 2016 for them was to maintain the blue wall. In other words, to win Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which candidate Clinton lost in 2016 by very narrow margins. They might yet do that when those results are called. We'll wait to see.
Right. Okay. We'd like to call on Tunu. Yeah.
Tunu, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Professor Mordi, I'd like you to address sort of the irony of President Trump attacking an electoral system which produced him as the president. He's made quite incendiary comments about the validity of mail-in voting. He's called into question whether or not a peaceful transfer, if it does come to that, would be automatic. And his emergence as the candidate that lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College is calling into question that establishment in itself. There was a Gallup poll that had 61% of Americans in favor of abolishing the Electoral College. Can we talk about what President Trump's contribution to American democracy is, whether in terms of reform and, exposing certain loopholes?
Good question. It's unfortunate, like I did say earlier on, that we've had this sort of comments coming from the President of the United States. The reality is this is politics. And if your approach to it is that you do what you have to win, then his strategy is good and working because it's effective. Now, if you look at the demographics in America, they're changing. And Republicans appeal to the demographic slivers that are shrinking in size, while the growing areas, mainly minority populations and young people, tend to vote Democrat. So to win the popular vote will be very difficult if you don't incorporate and expand the party. But the Electoral College and the Senate, the way it's structured, gives them the ability to win. Now, the president's strategy has been very clear from the beginning. He's not made any apologies about it. And he's appealed to a group and he's used divisive issues that are polarized, but are effective. Because unfortunately, there are enough Americans out there that have sufficient anxiety about their status and place in society, and they believe Trump can protect it. And the structure, in some ways, protects that. Now, it's unrealistic to think the Electoral College will ever be reformed in the next generation, for the simple reason that they're beneficiaries to that system. So why would you want to reform that? And even the census that was done this year, which many hoped would have reduced the level of gerrymandering and other features of the system that are not quite democratic. It's looking again like even that census might not be fully reflective of the population. So this is going to be with us for a while. I don't believe President Trump sees it as his as part of his job to promote democracy within America.
Right. There's a case scenario I'm thinking of in my head, and a couple of the networks have postulated this. A case where you have sort of like a tie, like a 270 or 269 scenario. I mean, what really happens? And it goes down to the wire, because you have to definitely get the vice president to be able to vote on one of the cases, and you have to go through state caucuses and the likes. I mean, what plays out when something like of that nature happens?
Well, it's unrealistic because we're very much uncharted territory. And what I mean by that is obviously if the president begins to challenge the results and there's some disruption in the votes, that people could take sides. When I mean people, the people who determine the electors in the Electoral College could take sides. So we talked about 3 states, and if you look at your calls and the analysis, the 3 North Midwestern states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin have not been called yet, and they will determine who wins this election. Now, those 3 states happen to have Democratic governors, but they have Republican Congresses. And the U.S. Constitution is done in such a way that the Congress of the Republic of the state determine who sends the electors. But the process for doing that is the vote. So you could have a situation where it's contested about who has electors there, and that could disrupt the Electoral College in terms of anybody meeting the threshold of 270 votes. Now, if there's a tie of 269 each, or there's the inability of any candidate to get to 270 because there's some controversy or some electors are stuck by December 10th when they meet, the process is such that it goes to the House. That's the House where Speaker Nancy Pelosi would chair that process, and the House will determine who the president is. However, it would not be done on a simple congressional basis, in which case there are likely to be more Democrats than Republicans from the results of tonight. But it will be done on a state-by-state basis. Each state delegation will have a single vote, and all 50 states will vote. At the moment, 26 of those states are Republican states. We've not seen the breakdown of the results of last night's election, but it's likely to be similar. And 22 of those states are Democrat states. The balance are states that are hung because they have an equal number of members of that delegation. In that scenario, despite Speaker Pelosi presiding, President Trump will be reelected. Well, he would be the winner of the election, and he will be sworn in, regardless of if he won 270 electoral votes. And if it's a tie, he will be sworn in legitimately either way, and is the next president.
Well, Chika Mordi, we have just about 3 minutes to go. This election has been described as a battle for the soul of America. But how much of a battle for the soul of America has it been, particularly with regard to the issues of COVID-19 and race relations, which seem not to have been major factors, considering the kind of results we're getting?
Indeed. I think in many ways it speaks volumes because it's extraordinary. So you have a candidate that has very much challenged some of America's values, and the values that America not only espouses, but has intervened in other countries across the globe to support those values. So democracy is a very American value, equality of people, human rights, all of that. These are very American values, and enfranchising an entire population regardless of the group, it's very American as well. And kind of Trump has made it very clear over the last 4 years where he stands. And the fact that almost one out of two Americans did vote for him last night speaks volumes about how America's values are changing. And it appears that there are people who say, okay, we see all of this, we see this attack on some of our values, or challenges, I should say, but yet he's the guy we're going to go with. And that is, for some of us, that is really depressing, because there are many people who thought that we're not going to really litigate the progress that has been made in the last few decades. And the fact that America holds a very special place in the world, whether we like it or not, America is the most influential nation in the world. And in many ways, even the current pandemic we're experiencing, American leadership makes a difference in how those things are resolved.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Chika Mordi, for joining us on this special edition on the American elections 2020.